right, most of these parts up here are part of a particular lobe in the brain. So, which one are most of these in? Because we're going to go over this today. So what lobe are most of these in, Connor? Frontal lobe, correct. But there's one up there that's not in the frontal lobe. So tell me which one up there is not in the frontal lobe. Which one's the odd one out? Recognizing faces, correct. And which lobe is that in? Occipital lobe, right? All right, so again, I know we didn't go over that, but you should be able to see that on your chart because I have them listed under the parts that you need to know. All right, so we are going to go over all of the lobes today: frontal, occipital, parietal, and temporal. And then with whatever time we have left, you are going to add those to your diagrams, all right, that we started yesterday. Figure out pictures that you're going to use for the different parts, all right, and add those to your brain diagrams. All right, so we're going to cover a lot today because obviously the cerebrum is the biggest part of the brain and it has the most sort of stuff that it controls in it. It shouldn't take too long to go over, and you should have a good amount of time to work on your diagrams today. So have your charts up because we are going to take a look at the lobes so that you can fill them in as we go and to their functions. All right, so we did not get into any lobes yesterday, am I correct? Like I said, fourth period's a little different spot than you are, so I thought you were here. I went over the frontal lobe with them yesterday, but that was a lot further I got. But I didn't think I got there with you guys, right? Am I correct? All right, I just want to make sure. All right, so I'm going to show you where these are. Like I said, you need to know where these are. Number one, you need to be able to put them on your diagram at the right spot because that's part of the requirements for the project, but also you need to know them, all right, to be tested on them, all right, because this is going to be main part of your test, is to know where these parts are. All right, so look at the frontal lobe, and I would say that, I mean, if you just look at it up here, it's probably the biggest lobe, so it makes sense that it has the most stuff in it and the most stuff that it controls. Looking at the size of them, it's bigger than most of the other lobes, so there's more stuff in the frontal lobe than some of the other ones that we will talk about. It's easier to go over the other ones. It's pretty quick. This one takes more because there's more stuff in it. All right, so the first part here is the Broca's area, and I will do these in the same color that the words are in. All right, so the Broca's area is actually named for somebody that discovered it. All right, and it is found in the lower portion of the frontal lobe, like right here above the temporal lobe. All right, so I'll put a circle where the Broca's area is, okay? And I'm going to add it up here. This is only on the left side. All right, so the Broca's area is not found on the right side of the brain. It's only on the left side. And this will relate to the video that we watched yesterday, all right, with the guy with the corpus callosum severed. And I'll explain that in a second. It controls the speech muscles. All right, so those muscles that control speech, so your lips, your tongue, all right, being able to control and forming words is the job of the Broca's area, to control those. So this is why yesterday when an image was flashed to his right side of his brain, remember, he couldn't say the words. He said, I didn't see that, but then they made him draw it. All right, and then he could say the words. This is why, because he obviously knew the word because he was able to draw it, but he couldn't form the words and speak them because his corpus callosum was severed and they didn't communicate. And the ability to speak and say the words is found on the left side, in the left hemisphere. So that's why when a word was flashed to his left side, he could say what it was that he saw, all right, what the word was. But he couldn't when it went to his right side, all right, because the Broca's area is only on the left. So it's weird because he knew the word, he could draw it, he just couldn't speak it, he couldn't say it because this ability lies on the left side. Okay? So it wasn't until he saw it on the paper and drew it that he was able to say it, all right, out loud. Okay? So Broca's area there is on the left side of the brain in the frontal lobe. Okay? Muscles involved with speech. All right, and then the next one here is the frontal eye field, and this is found always right above the Broca's area. They're literally right next to each other, okay? Frontal eye field is right above the Broca's area. All right, and similar to this eye field, so you know it has something to do with the eye. It doesn't control vision. We're going to get to that in another part. It controls the muscles of the eye, okay? So it's two areas here that control muscles. All right, so it's the Broca's area and the frontal eye field both control something with muscles. All right, in that, and you're going to see there's a third part that's going to control muscles in the frontal lobe. Okay, so when we say the muscles around the eye, it could be these that blink. And it's also the muscles of the eye that allow us to follow something up and down, side to side, all right, as our eyeball. Even some of our muscles as the pupil dilates, all right. So a lot of those muscles are controlled here from the frontal eye field, all right. So any muscles of the eye, all right, are controlled here. And this is also on the left only, all right. So I'll just put an L there, all right. Similar to the Broca's area, it's only on the left side. Okay, so it's not on both sides, just on the left. Okay, all right, so that's the frontal eye field, right above the Broca's area. All right, the next is higher intellectual reasoning, all right? And so this is not specific like the Broca's area and the frontal eye field, all right, as like you have to pinpoint it or only on the left side. This is throughout the frontal lobe, and I would say it's more towards like the front of the frontal lobe, all right? So I'm just going to draw like a larger area there, all right? And I'm not going to like be too particular with the higher intellectual reasoning. As long as you know that this is in the frontal lobe, sort of in the front portion of that, you're fine, all right, for that one. So like as far as pinpointing a picture for this, it can be anywhere pretty much in the front part of the frontal lobe, all right? It's not like I'm going to take off. I'll take off if it's in the parietal lobe, but I wouldn't take off if it's anywhere in the frontal lobe for this one. All right, and this one pretty much tells you what it does. It controls higher intellectual reasoning. So just to give you some examples, one of the things here is like evaluating the consequences of actions. All right, that's what we mean by intellectual reasoning, higher intellectual reasoning. Evaluating consequences. All right, and just some interesting things that I've read, and it's actually pretty recent that I've read here about this part of the frontal lobe. We used to think that the brain didn't really grow much after you were born, but there's some new research that says that it does change some up until, in fact, that you 28 in some cases. All right, that there's some development of the brain that occurs. And one of the areas that I was interested in that I read was the frontal lobe develops a lot and grows during puberty and during the teenage years. And this leads a lot to sort of maturity that this starts to develop, all right, during the puberty years and the teenage years. So one of the things that I've seen is that, and maybe you guys, hopefully you guys have not been subject to this, but I think that if you look at history and maybe have seen some of your friends, teenagers are not necessarily known for being able to stop and think and evaluate the consequences of their actions. They tend to be a little bit more impulsive, all right, and don't think about the long-term consequences when they do something. And this is because that frontal lobe is developing during the teenage years, and that higher intellectual reasoning portion does not really develop until maturity sets in. That's sort of why we become a little bit more mature, all right, that we're able to think about the consequences before we do something and don't just impulsively do something, all right, and react. All right, so they think that's part of the maturity process, is that frontal lobe is changing during puberty. So I guess I'm giving you an out. So for teenagers, you know, if you're impulsive and your parents yell at you, you can just say, I'm sorry, my frontal lobe is still developing. I can't help it, all right? It's not my fault, all right? It's my brain chemistry, all right? So, but like I said, I've seen some interesting research that shows that that could be why teenagers tend to be a little bit more impulsive, because this part hasn't quite developed yet, all right? And that's part of the maturing process, okay? All right, so that's higher intellectual reasoning, okay? So again, anywhere there in the frontal lobe. All right, language comprehension is the next part, and that is similar to evaluating, or the higher intellectual reasoning, that you can put it anywhere, but I would put it towards the base of the frontal lobe here somewhere, all right, sort of more down at the bottom portion of it there. And this basically tells you what it does: understanding words, all right, language comprehension, all right, if I had to restate it. Again, I've seen some things where they like look at someone who knows multiple languages, and this area lights up, and actually other parts light up too. But obviously, like if you are able to understand language comprehension as far as multiple languages, all right, you might have a bigger section here because you can understand more than one language. And you'll see that these are fluid. Like most people have higher intellectual reasoning here, but it can move to other places. Most people have language comprehension here, but it can be bigger, smaller, and they can see that like areas light up when they do certain scans of the brain, and then they subject them to different languages and things like that, and watch what areas of the brain sort of are evaluating that and controlling that. All right, so they know that, you know, this is for most people, but it's not necessarily all people have them in these areas, but we're going with like the general consensus here for most of us. Okay, so that's understanding words, or language comprehension. And then the last part is the motor area, and motor means movement. So this controls skeletal muscles. And this is sometimes called the motor strip because it's found in a strip at the back of the frontal lobe, right before the parietal lobe. All right, so it's that blue area right there. All right, like I said, sometimes, so that whole area controls skeletal muscles. So you can see here that we have several places that control skeletal muscles. We talked about the basal nuclei yesterday, all right, found anywhere within the cerebrum. We've got 2 places here that control muscles of the mouth, muscles of the eye, and then here we have this whole motor area that controls skeletal muscles, okay? So lots of different places that control the muscles of the body. Okay? All right, so that's frontal lobe. Questions about that? Okay? All right, so now let's move to the parietal lobe. All right, so on this, notice on your chart, I have the sensory area is bold. All right, so you have to label the sensory area. All right, so I'm going to show you where, well, there it is. All right, it's already labeled on there. The sensory area is in the front part of the parietal lobe. It's another strip like the motor area. It's right behind the motor area, all right, of the frontal lobe. So there's this strip there that's called the sensory area. Okay, so you just have to label it as the sensory area. But it's called the sensory area because it controls several senses, all right, not all of them. So if I said name you hear 5 senses, what are the 5 senses? Smell, taste, touch, sight, hearing, right? All right, so take a look at what I have in that sensory area. Does it control all 5 of those senses? How many of the 5? Touch, taste, right? So, yeah, 2 of the 5, right? All right, so it's called the sensory area, but I'm just telling you that it doesn't control all 5 of the senses. We're going to see where those other senses are controlled here in a little bit. All right, but it's called the sensory area because it controls some of the senses. All right, and it also controls pain and cold temperatures. Okay, so you can see those in there also, all right, in that sensory area. So what I want you to do for this is you're going to label the sensory area, but you are going to put these pictures that represent these in this strip. All right, you should have 4 pictures in there, all right, in that sensory strip. And I don't think I need to tell you what it does. This controls pain. This controls touch, all right? This controls cold temperatures, and this controls taste, all right? I don't need to reword those for you. It tells you what they do, okay? So you're going to do a picture that represents these 4 things, but they should all be in the sensory strip, which is why this is called the sensory area, because it controls 2 of our 5 senses, and then some other things that do deal with sensing things, okay? All right, so they all go in that sensory area. And that's it for the parietal lobe. That's the only thing I have there in the parietal lobe. Okay? So it's not too bad, all right? Just really one area of there. Okay? All right, next then we go to the occipital lobe. And there are 2 areas here that actually both deal with vision. All right, so we have the visual area. All right, and this is found in the base of the occipital lobe. Like this whole area here is the visual area. All right, and this controls sight. Okay, so I always like to think about this. All right, it's back here that controls your vision. All right. So my eyes are up front here. Why in the world doesn't the frontal lobe control that? Seem to be closest to the eyes. All right, so if I take my brain here, so my eyes are out here, right, in front. There are, right here, there are 2 optic nerves that the eyes, it goes straight back into the occipital area. All right, so it's not up here. All right, there's occipital nerves, all right, that they crisscross. Remember I said most nerves crisscross, all right, that goes straight back here to the occipital area. So actually, if you are ever like hit in the back of your head, all right, and you have damage to the occipital lobe, it can actually affect your vision, all right, because that's where it's controlled. Sometimes you see stars and different things like that, all right, but the vision can be, if you get hit in the back of the head, can actually mess up your vision, all right. Don't try it. Yeah, everybody's now trying to hit their head to see if they get, all right, vision problems, all right? But so you have to be careful, all right, because that actually controls vision. And that's because those nerves, like, go straight back, all right, into that area, all right, from the eyes, all right, back to the occipital lobe. And then the second part here is recognizing people. And obviously this goes along with the sort of sight. This can be anywhere. I'll just go like here. Anywhere, I don't care. As long as you put it somewhere in the occipital lobe for recognizing people, I don't care where. All right, doesn't matter. And it tells you what it does. It allows you to recognize faces. So remember, he talked about that recognizing faces yesterday when they did the books and the faces and the vegetables and the faces. All right, this helps us to recognize, like putting a name to a face, all right, knowing that's Taylor, all right, that's Ryan, all right, that's happening back here in my occipital lobe, all right, so recognizing people, all right, is in the back. Okay, so it's really only 2 areas there in the occipital lobe, both sort of dealing with vision, okay, all right, questions? Because then we just have 2 areas in the temporal lobe and then we're done with the cerebrum. Okay, all right, so move to the temporal lobe. All right, and we have 2 areas here, the auditory area and the olfactory area. All right, so tell me what auditory means. What does this control? Hearing, yes. Auditory means hearing, and this is typically sort of at the base of the temporal lobe. All right, draw a little, all right, circle there. All right, so this one makes a little bit more sense. Remember the temporal lobe's here, my ears are right here. All right, so this makes sense, all right, that my temporal lobe would control hearing. All right, so a little closer than the occipital lobe is to the eyes. All right, so that's your hearing area. And then the olfactory area. Anybody know what olfactory means? Smell, yes. And that I would put like anywhere above the auditory area. All right, so that controls smell. Okay, it's olfactory. All right, so 2 of the 5 senses are in their sensory strip, right, in the parietal, all right, touch and taste. And then vision we had in the occipital lobe, and then smell and hearing in the temporal lobe. Okay, so we've got all 5 of our senses covered there, but that's called the sensory strip because 2 of the 5 are there. All right, plus some other things. But okay, so that's your hearing and smell in the temporal lobe, and that's it. Okay? Questions on any of that? All right, so for each of those parts, so remember, I should see all of your lobes labeled. All right, so I want to see each of these lobes labeled, whether you do it by color like this and have a key, all right, that shows the colors. And then you should have pictures that represent the function of each of those other parts. So for higher intellectual reasoning, you're going to come up with a picture that represents higher intellectual reasoning. You're going to put that picture here in the frontal lobe and then have a key or write it out to the side beside it that says this is higher intellectual reasoning, all right, and it controls higher intellectual reasoning, all right. Some of them you have to, like obviously, like for the key here, you can say this is the auditory area, all right. The picture, you maybe put an ear, right, and you would say auditory area controls hearing, all right, something like that, all right. And then you might put a nose here and say olfactory area controls smell. All right, so for some of them you have to explain a little more than others, like pain, cold, touch, taste. You don't really have to explain too much. You just say pain. All right, tell me what picture represents that and say that's pain. All right, that's cold. All right, and so on and so forth. Some of, like Broca's area, you have to do a little bit more explanation because it doesn't really tell you what it does. But some of the ones that tell you what it does, you don't really have to do too much of an explanation for those. But a picture should represent the function. All right, so that you match that with what it does. Okay? Questions? All right, labeling things in bold, putting pictures for the things that are not in bold on your chart. Okay? All right, you have time to work on that, figure out what you're doing. If you need supplies, let me know. All right, we've got some up here, all right, but let's start putting that together and getting the parts of the cerebrum done because we're going to continue to add to them as we add more. Okay? And you can see my examples up here if you didn't get a chance to look at them yesterday.